And welcome to everyone that's online, as well as folks in the room here, to the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investment Working Group, or GARI, 2023 summer meeting. We're very pleased to be able to present to you today, to folks here in the room and online, a panel of experts really focused on talking about different perspectives and initiatives that are happening in the public and private sector around implications for adaptation and climate resilience investment. GARI, the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investment Working Group, is a 501c3 nonprofit here in the United States that brings together a multiple set of stakeholders looking at the question of what are the implications for investors and what are the opportunities for investment generated by the need for adaptation and resilience to climate change. We'll have a traditional kind of two-segment part of this meeting, the first half of which until 10 o'clock will be a panel of wonderful experts here in Washington and online, talking about recent developments and initiatives in the public and private sector and their implications for adaptation and climate resilience investors. And then a second half of the meeting starting at 10 o'clock, that's traditional. We'll have a roll call of participants online, as well as a discussion of different initiatives that are occurring in kind of a clearinghouse fashion before wrapping up at about 10:30 today. Without further ado, I'd like to just start by turning to our panel of experts here to talk about and build on the April convening that we had, the implications for investors that are interested in adaptation and climate resilience of recent activities and initiatives in the public and private sector. So I'd love to start, and I'm very pleased that Chris Creed, the Chief Investment Officer of the Department of Energy Loan Programs Office, will be kicking off here and talking about a few of the initiatives, one or two key initiatives that are going on at the Department of Energy, and then perhaps the implications for the resilience and adaptation component of investment. Chris?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to this group. You know, we're extremely excited at the Loan Programs Office. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, and I think as particularly important for this group, the additional expanded authority that we got in the energy infrastructure reinvestment component of our program. It gave $5 billion of loss reserve, technical term credit subsidy, loss reserve for up to $250 billion of energy infrastructure projects. And so, as we think about the objectives of your group, as we see what we imagine will be utilities, IPPs, and sort of other players in the energy space utilize this program to reinvest, especially aged infrastructure. We need to be very cognizant of some of the issues that your group is talking about, whether that be retransmissioning, from as simple as putting power lines through forests in dry areas of western states may not be the greatest idea, to how are we thinking about climate change when it comes to weather events and flood zones for consumers, impact on our very clear desire to expand nuclear. All of these are examples of projects, somewhat anonymized, that we have in our 1706 pipeline, in our EIR pipeline, and these are the kinds of things that we would expect to be coming in even more size as more and more of those players, especially the utilities, come to realize that, hey, this is actually a really great opportunity to bring forward investments that they were already going to make over the next 10 or 15 years and do them sooner, so we can catalyze more and more deployment.
That's great. So the headline really here is $5 billion ends up mobilizing through a first loss position or credit reserve over $250 billion, not just for the energy transition, but also baked into that implications for resilience and adaptation in terms of how you're thinking about transmission, how you're thinking about storage, how you're thinking about the energy mix. These things are intertwined. They're not separate silos. It's not a tale of two islands, the energy transition or net zero decarbonization transition and adaptation and climate resilience, but there's a holistic thought process that's part of what you're thinking about at DOE, or is that?
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree with that statement. I often think about the world in risk factors, and there are a lot of risk factors that the historical experience from from whenever until 2020 will not get you a particularly good estimate of forward risk factors. I think flood zones is the easiest for people to get their heads around. Right. If you look at the flood zone maps and you look at the floods that we've experienced over the past 5 or 6 years, they don't necessarily match.
Right.
And so as we think about what are the risk factors to our projects, we are very comfortable taking speculative grade risk in projects that we think are important to catalyze investment in, whether it be energy infrastructure or new energy technologies or automotive transportation initiatives, manufacturing, whatever. But the thing is, we want to do it extremely thoughtfully. And so as we think about risks, we are no longer just thinking about traditional finance risks, debt service coverage ratio, loan to value, blah, 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 right? You also have to think about, what are the risks associated with supply chain disruptions? What are the risks associated with environmental areas, not just, and I don't mean this flippantly, not just am I hurting a native species or am I bringing in an invasive species into this area, but if I am here and climate change continues along the path that we see it, what are the risks to my facilities here? What are the risks? And as and we were chatting earlier, one of the big initiatives that we have is distributed systems, right? Going into what we're calling virtual power plants, distributed consumer energy technologies. And that's where we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to what are the risks associated with climate change, because it's not just one widget factory in Wichita, Kansas, and we can sort of boundary value what we think the probability of, earthquakes, floods, or whatever are. When you have, as is likely the case for the project that we announced in April, the Sonova Hestia project, 10,000 or more individual consumers who will have benefited from our guarantee, and we're going to have to know where they are and what the implications of all of these risk factors are.
That's great to hear. I mean, I think the risk piece of the discussion turns potentially into an opportunity for investors and for technologists and entrepreneurs as well to address those risks or take account of those things. I mean, virtual power plants, energy storage, even thinking about the projections of energy demand in a world where we're going to need a lot more cooling of some type and heat events like we're seeing right now across the United States and China and other places. And also, I think, the last one of these meetings we had in Washington was on the eve of the Mars sky in New York City, where everyone's running air purifiers, right? And that's going to also create different spikes in demand for energy. And then
I was luckily here, but my wife was up in New York, and I saw the pictures. It was pretty scary. The other one I'll add, and I don't want to dominate it. We have an amazing set of panels, but as we look at one of the things that we've probably been the most successful at over the past 2 years, it's been onshoring, reshoring, and friendshoring the supply chain for battery chemistries. But almost all of that, I think that's a fair statement, was on the sort of broad lithium-ion battery complex, right? So, those are great. They're energy dense. They're relatively safe. If they're constructed correctly, tend to not catch on fire. But they have, they have big issues. There's only a handful of places you can get spherical graphite. There's only lithium is difficult to get, and there's a lot of other chemicals in there that you really need to get after. So one of the things that we're looking at in our pipeline going forward is, well, what are some other battery chemistries that we can lean into, and what are some of the things that we can do, because we're going to need a lot. One of the things we're going to need is a lot more batteries. Yep. And the lithium ion chemistry is likely going to be the battery that is in electric vehicles for the foreseeable future. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the chemistry that's for grid stability or for homes. Exactly.
Yeah. And the demand for that might change as we see volatility of weather and other kinds of patterns.
Exactly right.
Thank you very much, Chris. Really happy and extremely personally pleased to have Jenny Bavishi join us here, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, the Deputy Administrator of NOAA. Welcome, Jenny. It's great to see you. We've already gotten kicked off with Chris from the Loan Programs Office. Would love to have you give a quick thumbnail on what NOAA is up to right now and what initiatives you're most excited about that have potential implications in the investment realm for adaptation and climate resilience.
Yeah, well, sorry for literally butting into your conversation. Thanks for having me. So earlier last month, early in June, we announced $2.6 billion in Inflation Reduction Act investments, and we're very excited about those. They are going towards, first time programs that we've never been able to launch before. The first is a Climate Resilience Regional Challenge, CRRC, $575 million going towards coastal resilience solutions. We're specifically taking on a collaborative approach. So we're looking for collaborations to form to apply for this challenge. There's money for capacity building and for implementation. So that's an important piece of it, and technical assistance along the way. Probably more relevant for this group, though, are two other announcements that just more recently went out. One is on a Climate Ready Workforce Initiative. It's $60 million, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, $60 million that will fund climate literate workforce initiatives. The grants are $500,000 to about $10 million. And then there's also $60 million that we just announced yesterday for ocean-based climate accelerators. So we're supporting both planning and design, as well as implementation of accelerator programs to support marine-based climate resilience solutions. So public-private partnership model supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs to come up with observation technologies, products, and really we're looking to support sustainable business models to commercialize ocean-based solutions. So really excited about that. I think that's probably what we're most excited about and very focused on, moving this implementation forward. All these notice of funding opportunities are out now, which is very exciting. It always takes a very long time to get there. So we're, we're jumping into the outreach and, looking excited to see what comes out of these applications.
That's great. And to be clear, in the outreach here, it's not just governments or subnationals or municipals, it's also the private sector, it's technologists, it's investors. It's saying, look, we are open to collaborative solutions for these specific areas. There's funding that's available to accelerate that process. So as investors start to think about even oceans or coastal regions and how there's going to be a necessary amount of investment in resiliency, this is a source of potential funding and collaboration and a coordination point. Is that a fair way to think
Absolutely.
about it?
Absolutely.
And then one thing I just wanted to push on a little bit, which is the theme started, which is, look, there's a big push out of the IRA and other things around what might be described as mitigation or decarbonization or the energy transition, but there's clear implications for resiliency and adaptation baked into that.
Mm-hmm.
And are you seeing that same kind of intertwining? The oceans, climate accelerator, I would assume, is not just one piece of a decarbonization or the low carbon transition or just adaptation, but there's the potential to really see these things integrated together.
Oh, absolutely. And I think NOAA's work is actually much more focused on the adaptation and resilience side than the decarbonization side. We're always looking for solutions with co-benefits. So whether it's investing in green infrastructure or ocean-based technologies that can do both, we're certainly looking for those opportunities. But these programs that I mentioned are actually pretty explicitly focused on adaptation.
That's great. I mean, that's been a laggard in some degree in the kind of climate discussion. So it's great to see that emphasis. And I'm hoping that NOAA and DOE talk to each other about how weather volatility is going to affect energy demand and resiliency and adaptation. So it's wonderful to see that in the engagement with the private sector. Picking up on that theme, I'm really excited to have Paul Bodnar here, the Director of Sustainable Finance, Industry, and Diplomacy at the Bezos Earth Fund, and wanted to turn to Paul and ask, what is one or two initiatives that you're focused on that have implications for the adaptation and climate resilience investment landscape as you guys kind of think about the changing world that we're seeing in the climate action universe?
Thank you, Jay. Great to see you. I look like the Wizard of Oz up here on the screen, so I think I can, kind of massage your head here in the background on screen. But we are primarily focused on mitigation and protection and restoration of nature, as well as equity. So we've looked really carefully at sort of what's the intersection of the resilience agenda with those other goals. And we've definitely come to the conclusion that you can't really advance decarbonization, equity, or nature protection without tackling resilience head on for a number of reasons. One is, of course, the sort of mechanical reasons. You can't try to provide people essential cooling or comfort cooling without doing so in a way that's hyper efficient in terms of potential for runaway emissions associated with powering cooling systems. You can't, figure out a clean energy system that relies on hydro without taking into account changes in the climate. You can't stretch transmission lines across the world without thinking about wildfire risks. So all of that mechanical stuff, but also very importantly, if our societies are preoccupied with the basics of safety and livelihood in the next 10 years, as we grapple with climate change effects, as we're seeing here right now in this country, then it's going to be harder to focus attention and resources and political will on decarbonization, even if it's very clear that the two are related, just in terms of resource allocation, mind share, and so on, particularly for developing countries. So we're very interested in this, and I think in particular, Jay, as you know, we've been thinking about how we can reframe adaptation finance away from for investors, from something that like they think of as a line item on a government budget, into something that approximates more of a market, right? There is a market for climate resilient solutions, as you've demonstrated with Craft, but I don't think that has sort of pierced the consciousness necessarily of investors as a whole and the financial sector as a whole. And we've seen with decarbonization the power of focusing investors on the opportunity presented by the transition to a low carbon economy, and what happens when capital pours into a thematic area like that, right? It increases the availability of capital all across the investment chain from VC to infrastructure. It reduces the cost of capital. It has a huge effect on stimulating innovation, attracting talent, and like getting the real innovation and business model innovation, technology innovation happening in the real economy that is essential to solving that problem. We need to do the same thing for resilience. So we need to kickstart that same process in public markets, not just private markets, for resilience by focusing on the opportunity that products, technologies, services that improve resilience outcomes have, right? And as I like to say, if you like decarbonization as an investment theme, you're going to love resilience, because unlike decarbonization, there's not as much uncertainty associated with the growth in demand for these products and services, right? There's no political uncertainty. It's science, and yes, there's questions about the distribution of impacts and et cetera, and who should pay for the investments. But if you're supplying water pumps, wildfire analytics, comfort cooling, the list goes on and on, as you've demonstrated, Jay, then there's a market. And the public benefit of stimulating private investment in these solutions is, again, that although there is going to be, unfortunately, a really high price tag for adaptation on a societal level, that price tag is not fixed. And the cost to society of doing this is very much a function of how fast we can innovate, how much we can drive down the cost of these technologies. And we're just not doing that right now in terms of the power of capital markets to shape that process. So that's the sort of thematic area that we're focused on here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paul. So I think we've started here with Chris thinking about the energy transition, how there's clear implications on the risk side for resilience and adaptation requirements to be baked into, and potentially opportunities in the investment around storage, around a distributed energy system, around applications and projections about energy demand because of different weather volatilities. There's clear actual direct action being taken by NOAA and others on adaptation, specifically in coastal resilience. Some areas that have not been areas of historic focus that for the first time are really being a target of IRA funding in the Biden administration, and an outreach to the private sector in that implication. So implications in the energy transition, direct focus on the adaptation side of it. And then as Paul said, both a policy awareness and an interest in considering this as a market opportunity for mobilization of capital in an integrated way, right? Where decarbonization and resilience happen at the same time. And it would be in everybody's interest if that could be scaled more quickly and the cost of that transition and the technology advancements happen more quickly as well. And that's a great policy objective and a potential investment case. And the pivot at this part of the conversation is to Jessica Tia, who is the director of BlackRock Sustainable Investing, and talking about that's a great policy set of objectives. The government's opening its hand to the private sector. That's wonderful. Is there an investment case that the markets and asset managers and asset owners who need to pay for teacher retirements and people's 401ks and the broader investment and technology landscape that actually is responding to this, or that you're beginning to see some implications for? So Jessica, to you, just would love to hear about one or two specific initiatives that you think are happening, and then your thoughts about how the government side of it is beginning to move its way into investor consciousness, or if there's an opportunity on the investment side here. Jessica.
Sure. Thanks, Jay. I'm really happy to be here. As many of you know, at BlackRock, we've been, especially a sort of small group of us, have been championing sort of the resilience and adaptation effort. And I'm really happy to report, if you didn't see, last week, BlackRock, in a piece of published literature, wrote that we see climate resilience emerging as a key investment theme. So that is something that was just personally really exciting, I think, for me, but also for this room of folks who have been helping to champion this theme here internally. And I think one of the big developments I wanted to share with you all, that being the punchline, and I think I'll set a little bit of context. I think most of you know, but at BlackRock, we spend a great deal of time talking to our clients about how to invest in the transition, right? And that climate focused investment to date and in the market at large has been focused on mitigation. So we have over $650 billion in what we call sustainable AUM at BlackRock today, and we classify about 100 billion of that as transition specifically. And the majority of our clients, like in a survey that was just revealed to us, the results in the last couple of weeks, the majority of them want to increase their allocation to transition-related investing. So I think the onus is on us to make sure the resilience and adaptation are part of the transition. When we talk about the transition to a low carbon economy, and we talk about that with institutional clients and wealth clients and the market at large, we need to talk about the transition to a low carbon and more resilient economy, a climate resilient economy. And I think that's something when we talk about broadly, I would love for us to have that sort of shared vocabulary. But anyway, the important sort of development that I really wanted to share that may not be something everyone knows about is that last week we published what we call our BlackRock Investment Institute Transition Scenario, or forgive me, the BITS. And so right now, that is what I think is really exciting. That's our forecast of how we think this transition will unfold. The shape of that transition, the pace of the transition, and across technologies, sectors, and regions. It's not company specific, but this is something that's going to help inform our investors to help navigate and analyze how the impact of that transition on portfolios, on the economy. And what we are really, this sort of theme that came out of this is, and I think a lot of internal stakeholders are focused on this, and it's something that caught my eye for sure, is that the growth effects are really dominated by extreme weather events and other climate-related physical damages over time, rather than by transition-related factors. And so if we think about these damages increasing to mid-century and beyond as the temperature continues to increase, the BITS estimates that damages to GDP in 2050, and I know Paul's going to tell me 2050 is way too far away, but that's what I'm allowed to share with you, are more than 5%. And that's GDP only. That doesn't include any impacts on wealth and well-being. And I think this sort of lost output from lower productivity, and this sort of idea that there's destruction of infrastructure and equipment in extreme weather events, that's something that as an output of a model that was meant, and a tool that's meant to predict the transition, I think is really powerful, that is one of the key takeaways. And so not as a result of this, but I think using that to help sort of buttress the momentum we already have around resilience today, we are actively exploring how we can use our investment experience to help participate and make progress on climate resilience and adaptation, particularly in the public markets. We've had real interest from clients, real recognition that the impacts of climate are driving demand from all sectors of the economy. And so what are we actually doing? And I'll pause here after I tell you, but these are the things that I'm really focused on. And there's a team of us here exploring, and if I forget to say this later, like I hope this is a call to action to anyone in this room or listening virtually who would like to collaborate with us. We need to leverage the expertise of people like you all. But really, like we are working to both explore a framework for how we can, make climate resilience and adaptation investing a true investment framework in the public markets. So leveraging a lot of the work that Jay has already done. Investigating and drafting a research on the investment case for resilience and adaptation, and also using data to identify companies that we believe are really have this exposure to resilience and adaptation, so that we can then go out and say multi-sector opportunity where we see specific companies that stand to benefit over time as a result of their ability to serve what we call sort of the climate solutions demand that is growing. I will pause there.
That is very exciting. I mean, to hear that, I think, robustness of analysis around the transition scenario itself, it is staggering to hear the headline of a 5% impact on GDP alone. I mean, the necessary implications of that across multiple sectors, the potential political implications from a stability standpoint of migration or scarcity, how that's distributed. That 5% impact, I would assume, is not like evenly spread like, butter across the entire society economy. It's going to be, unfortunately, probably very disproportionately impacted, and there'll be necessary implications for that. But the other side of it, then saying there is push demand from the investor community, which will respond to the open hand of the government on the transition itself. On the energy side, direct activity engagement on adaptation and resilience, where there's an interest in, and again, to Paul's characterization here, this integrated approach where resiliency and the decarbonization transition happen at the same time. There's one transition. This is not a tale of two islands, adaptation island and mitigation island. We're going to live in one future. So whether you call it climate 2.0 or a resilient net future or an adapted decarbonization, I think it just shows you without that happening in an integrated way on the public and the private side, then you have potential for really substantial impact here. Now, flipping that over again from the investor standpoint to some of the most strong expertise that's out there on the corporate and technology side. I'm really excited to have Mysore here again from McKinsey to talk about the kind of initiatives and work that they're seeing in the landscape of the potential market for adaptation and climate resilient solutions in the corporate world. And also this, I'd love for you to comment if you have a view on this idea that seems to be evolving, that these things need to be integrated together, that there is a climate 2.0 approach, or that the necessary way that we will face this real transition, which is clearly ongoing in the energy system and the decarbonization landscape, will be necessarily requiring adaptation and climate resilience assumptions at a minimum, and really integrated demand for technologies and a market opportunity as a result. Here.
No, thank you, Jay. And can I just say it's like extremely exciting to be on this panel, right? And kind of listening to the kind of solutions that are being talked about and assembled, right? And in many ways, it feels very similar to, if we all go back, I don't know how many, but like 15 years or so. But we were all, I'm guessing, in similar conversations, right? On, oh wow, electric cars could be really big, right? and this could be a big transition and an investable sort of value proposition. And then here we are now, and this feels similar in some sense, right? And the work that we have been doing focuses on this on exactly the theme that you laid out, Jay, which is sort of adaptation technologies, right? And the question of what are the technologies that are actually available to invest in, and what are the types of companies that are available to invest in, should we want to, right? And obviously, as we all, I think, certainly on this panel and listeners know and recognize, investments and the amount of money that people might make from this is not the point, right? The point is the fact that allowing market-based solutions to emerge is an incredible opportunity to scale up adaptation technologies faster than what one stakeholder can do alone, right? And it is much more effective for private companies to work together with public companies to craft kind of solutions at scale and get them ramped up. And and look, broadly speaking, we see two types of technologies at the highest level. You have a number of technologies that are effective, and I'm borrowing from your taxonomy, which is, there are a number of technologies that assess physical climate risks, right? And broadly thought of as sort of climate adaptation intelligence, right? And these are everything from data gathering technologies, right? So soil moisture, temperature, plant sensors, to decision integration technologies, so supply chain digital twins, sub-tier mapping platforms, all of that, all of which are necessary for resilience, right, and resilience building. I'll come back to some of those in just a minute, but there's a broad. We think that there are 5 categories of technologies within that, right, which now newly empowered through the rise of Gen AI as well. And then you have a second class of technologies, which is to address physical climate risks, right? And these are everything from asset hardening technologies to spare capacity creation technologies to crisis response technologies, right? So off-grid polystyrene-based floating homes, right, that might be required for flood-prone regions, to satellite-based damage assessment or drone-based damage assessments to allow, money and reduce fraud, for wildfire or flood impacted regions. So all of these different types of technologies, to some degree, have been crafted. As we were looking at this market, right, though, kind of a few interesting themes emerged. One is, in many cases, the companies that are actually building these technologies, not in every case, but the companies that are actually building these technologies have little to no awareness of the extent to which climate adaptation could actually impact them, right? Mostly in positive ways in terms of their own trajectory, right? The second is that in many cases, these technologies were actually, and these companies were actually cash flow generating for reasons that have nothing to do with climate resilience. And just because they're good businesses, they have applications other than climate resilience, things like that. And so for an investable value proposition, right, many of these are not actually the out there big bets, $2 billion before you see any return type, type things that sometimes can happen in these kind of long-term investments, right? So many of them are much more tangible, much more practical type of technologies, at least the ones that we could find and assess, right? And we looked at about 150 of them. So what we see, and by the way, there is a line here between which of these technologies are quote unquote pure adaptation based, which of these are focused on sustainability much more than adaptation, and there are ways of thinking about that we can talk about, but by and large, right, the notion is that these are technologies that are helpful from an adaptation standpoint, and so ensuring that they're at least included in the conversation is important with the appropriate decision when you are actually making an investment decision, right? The appropriate lens when you're making an investment decision about market sizing and so forth. But the way we see it is that these technologies are real. We think that many future unicorns that we don't know about today will be minted from companies that are advancing meaningfully along the lens of these technologies. And by the way, we don't think there's enough of them, right? If you look at the need that's out there, right, from the perspective of innovation, and you add up all of these technologies and kind of scale them to their natural extension, we still feel like there is a gap between what exists and what is needed, right? So I love the example that was spoken about before about the accelerator program for the Ocean Accelerator sort of idea, where we just need a lot more ideas to sort of come in here to really expand the funnel of available technologies and investment propositions. And so anything that can be done will truly allow us to move away from an inevitable world where people are facing the worst impacts of climate change, and people least equipped to face it are facing the worst impacts of climate change, and into a world where climate change is at least managed, and the impact of the population is managed in a foreseeable way.
That's great, Mihir, and I really like the framing that you have of the types of technologies. It's great to hear that you've looked at least 5 categories on the assessment side. There are 150 technologies or more in a systematic way at McKinsey. The taxonomy that you mentioned is the Adaptation Solutions Taxonomy, which was funded and released in 2020 after peer review by the Global Environment Facility, the Inter-American Development Bank. It's available at climateasap.org if you want to have a look at it, and documentation that describes it. And it's consistent with the European Union Sustainable Finance Taxonomy and other approaches to defining adaptation. I know the US government's actually had a call for proposals under the PREPARE strategy that uses a similar approach and saying, look, we need to really scale up in developing countries the capacity, the technologies for assessment, the technologies and solutions for actually managing some of these impacts, and is actively engaged with the private sector in trying to call for that kind of activity. Here, I think it's also the 2 points you made about these are companies that in many cases wouldn't necessarily know that they're involved in supporting adaptation and climate resilience. Nobody goes out in the morning and buys a loaf of adaptation. The frontier of what will be adapted to is changing all the time. This year, New Yorkers for the first time thought about climate change as a breathing hazard as opposed to a flood risk or storm risk or hurricane hazard, right? And unfortunately, I think you're going to see disease vectors change, human health implications change as we see the environment just continuously change under the IPCC and other types of scenarios that are out there. We're going to go in reverse order, and I think we have time for 2 more potential rounds of questions here, and start from Mihir then and say, look, that's great that you're seeing these opportunities, you're seeing these initiatives. What is the call to action or the barriers that could lead to a call to action for the private sector, either the entrepreneurs that are out there, technologists, young people, I think constantly we talk to or hope are listening to this conversation, and investors that are either holding back or could potentially address some of the $100 billion additional demand that Jessica T is talking about, or the mobilization of 250 billion plus that Department of Energy is focused on in transitioning the entire economy, or the kind of new resiliency and adaptation strategies that the U.S. government's focused on. So would love your perspective here, and then we'll go back in reverse order here to Jessica, Paul, and then to Janie and Chris on that. So maybe just a couple of minutes on that as we have some time. Here.
Yeah, and let me talk about one, because I think we're all aware of several. But look, I mean, these are more than barriers. I think they're just opportunities of what we need to focus on in the next bounce of the ball, right? And the one that certainly would be my favorite to pick would be help make companies aware of how much they are spending already on adaptation, because right now they're doing a lot of it, right? And a lot of these as far as we can tell, are band-aids that they have put in place today, which leads to additional OPEX. And they don't actually know how much this OPEX adds up to. And they don't know what percentage of their total spend is focused on ensuring reliable delivery of product. And actually just saying, look, here's how much you're spending, right, today. And is this the most efficient way that you could achieve these goals, right? Would actually lead to an unlock, we think, of the rate at which some of these adaptation technologies get picked up by the market, and a willingness to invest in ways that are willingness to invest CapEx instead of OPEX band-aids. And we think that to us is beneficial for the company that's purchasing these technologies, as well as more broadly. So anything that can be done to help encourage that message will be deeply meaningful.
That's great, Mihir. And at Lightsmith, where we're looking at growth stage companies that do adaptation and climate resilience, we've seen some of that. So in the utility sector, wildfire risk management in California, which has become an existential threat. I mean, BlackRock produced a report talking about the vulnerability of U.S. utilities to wildfire and storm risk. PG&E, the 10th largest utility, went bankrupt because of wildfire impact. There's now this recognition that you cannot expand OPEX forever and just keep hiring more people to look at trees and draw X's on them. We need to start thinking about systems, using data from the government, thinking about implications for the energy mix and the architecture of the energy system, and use technology, whether it's drone-based or satellite-based artificial intelligence to identify where vegetation is encroaching, that practical solutions that actually then save costs because you're replacing humans with technology in that sense, and really then account for the dynamic future that we're going to face. So I think it's a great point to let's call it awareness, like awareness of the spend or the ROI awareness for adaptation. Maybe is I'll think of you can think of a more clever acronym for that. Maybe when you get to the next person. Jessica, barriers, and then the call to action that sort of unlocks some
Sure.
of
Yeah.
these.
I mean, yeah.
Go
I mean, I think, just what was just said about helping make companies aware of how much they're spending is totally aligned with how I've been thinking about this, which is sort of like when we talk about adaptation, you're not necessarily displacing current consumption. And I think that makes it really hard for the market to understand. When you talk about like the sinking foundations of buildings in Chicago, as written in the New York Times this morning, or the air in New York City, you don't automatically go like ding, 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 like there's dollar signs in your head. And I think one of the things, if we sort of think about sort of the reframing, that there isn't always a near-term revenue opportunity, but a reframing of, I think, not only just companies, but even as a society, how much individuals are spent on at-home diagnostic tests, making life virtual, air purifiers, fans, the air conditioning. I think, and even from insurance and insurance initiatives in emerging markets, and how much is being spent today, if we could almost aggregate that number, I know some people are working on that already, to help understand both like current spend and the current opportunity. If we could do that, in a sort of rigorous way, the same way we would address any other market opportunity, I think that would be a huge benefit.
That's great. It sounds more like this idea, again, of awareness and recognition. I think the idea that you could identify and point to kind of like, what does it mean? Like decarbonization, if you just said that to a normal human, they would be like, I don't know what that is. But if you say, oh, it's about electric vehicles, it's about solar energy, it's about grid storage, it's about producing food in a way that is not as polluting. It's about water sources that are not going to be as energy intensive. It's about better health for you because you're not seeing as many pollutants from fossil fuel combustion, et cetera, et cetera. I think giving those examples, so awareness, as Mihir said, about what actually is being spent and what the ROI on that is today within companies. And then Jessica, maybe awareness of companies that they are part of this solution set, and that there's an aggregation of a market trend, which is growth on parts of the market that we're just beginning to see. Paul, barriers and a call to action for getting engagement in the private sector on the technology side, the entrepreneurship side, the investor side, all of the above, whichever one you think is most relevant.
Yeah. Well, the barrier that I'm worried about is less on the entrepreneurship and the technology side and more on the investor side. I in particular, I think we have a very simple task, which is good, which is we need to rewire people's brains a little bit. And have them understand this conversation, which is there are opportunities here to invest. And in order to do that, you do need to not just think about this as a line item on a government budget, which is the fault of many of us who've been working on climate finance for a long time, right? Which is that adaptation finance is, for example, in the UN context, right, talked about a certain way and does not speak the language of private investment. And so we need to create that language and that framing because it's there and because the investment opportunities, at least to us perhaps who follow this conversation, are obvious. But we need to get investors like BlackRock is already doing, but others, to be studying how to give their clients exposure to this theme, right? How do you give ordinary savers, how do you get them excited about the opportunity to invest in this space? How do you give them that exposure? What does it mean to put together an investment fund that builds on your good work, Jay, but beyond growth equity, right, in public markets to do this? What is not just the taxonomy that's appropriate for that you developed for SMEs, but that works for a broader set of public equities, fixed income, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really, if we can build that kind of basic machinery and architecture, combine it with the work that Mihir and colleagues have been doing, looking at the market opportunity, make sure that it does indeed fit with the other agendas that folks are following on sustainability, whether that's decarbonization or equity or nature, then we'll have created a really powerful set of tools. But we need to make this not just a niche conversation, right, between Jay, you and your LPs in your fund, or those of us who nerd out on these things. We need to pierce the public consciousness a little bit and say, this is something that all investors can participate in because it is a key growth market of the 21st century, and we need to treat it as such, even though the underlying reason is very much a sad one, right, and an unfortunate one. But think of it a little bit like healthcare, maybe, right? The healthcare industry is an industry, and we all hope and wish that companies are going to innovate and develop new technologies for surgery and new drugs and pharmaceuticals. Like that's understood as an industry, even though its underlying reason for existing is that people get sick. So it's understanding that we can stimulate this market, study how you can generate alpha in that for your clients in that market, while really staying focused on the public good generation piece in this early stage when we're all formulating taxonomies and approaches and narratives. That's very, very important.
I think that's a great point. I struck a little bit by Mihir's comment earlier, which is just feels like the conversation about electric vehicles 10 or 15 years ago. I think during the last financial crisis, the Department of Energy, if you had said, listen, I think electric vehicles are going to be an inevitable thing, I think you would have gotten a couple of, side glances on that. And now I think the investment opportunity is very clear to many, many sets of investors, individual investors, institutional investors, asset owners, and so on. The question is, can that realization, given Jessica's 2050 scenario projection, where there's very clear impacts that will be out there, risks, and the unfortunate reality of physics now unfolding ahead of us. Like, I have more certainty about the fact that climate change is going to continue than I do about the interest rate forecast of the future, or consumer behavior, what happens with ChatGPT. And so how then can we craft investments that make sense? What is the Tesla of adaptation and climate resilience in the future? Because there will be a need for those kind of scale, and we want those solutions to be at that kind of scale. So turning to Janie and then Chris, what is the call to action, the barriers that you're seeing that could be overcome by the private sector from an entrepreneurial standpoint, from a community standpoint, from an investor standpoint? You're actively engaged. It's great to see these new initiatives. What would you want the private sector to do?
I think I'm just going to underscore what each of the other panelists said here. NOAA actually held a series of roundtables over the course of the last year or so with different industry groups: insurance, reinsurance, architecture, engineering, tourism industry as well. And NOAA is in the business of what Mihir called providing climate intelligence, right? We have the Weather Service, but we also have a treasure trove of climate data that is unfortunately still sometimes somewhat hard to access, but there and available. We were basically having these roundtables to get some feedback on, is industry using this information? Is it serving their needs? What else could we be doing to supply the information that industry is looking for? And we found that a lot of the focus was very, very short term. There were more asks for better coordination around weather forecasts than there were around long-term climate data. And then there was also, like, the tourism industry was very clear that that they are really focused on short-term solutions, and the long-term solutions are more elusive. So I think that, and I find this in my work on a daily basis, not just when thinking about private sector engagement, having the information, providing the information is one piece of it, but that doesn't necessarily get you to solutions. So we need to sort of speed up that innovation, so the innovation is taking advantage of that information that's readily available, and then engaging, with the users of these technologies, and we're promoting adoption as quickly as possible.
It sounds like both a perspective also on how do we shift the focus from the immediate ex post response, like,
totally.
The weather is really bad today, the air quality is really bad today. This kind of discussion that Mihir was saying, like, about what about a CapEx? Okay, well, not just throwing up air purifiers, but the equity and justice components of the IRA. We're saying, look, the communities that take it on the chin every single time, whether it's COVID or environmental pollution or the physical risk and impact from climate change, are the same communities. Instead of just treating it like disaster relief, can we build better communities? Can we develop more technology? Can we more equitably have that transition in a way that is going to be better for those futures over the next 50 to 100 years? But I think that time scale question is interesting. Not just can we get companies to think about their own internal ROI? Can we start to identify the companies in the public markets, to Jessica's point, that actually are doing this kind of activity? Can we make investors aware and frame it as the opportunity that we think that it is? And then can we shift towards a more medium run kind of ex ante perspective? Chris?
Jay, that question and the conversation that Mihir and Jess were having, I think is actually the right question. So the thing that I forgot if it was Mihir or Jess, Jess is my friend, so I'll assume it was her, that there's a lot of, like, deferred capex that are masquerading itself as OpEx in a lot of these, whether it's companies or homes or whatever. And one of the big objectives that we have is if we can convince companies, utilities, 1706, individuals, whoever it is, that if you look at the PV of your future capex that you know you're going to have, let's take a home, right? You know you're going to replace your roof. You know your HVAC system's going in 20 years. You know you're going to have to replace your refrigerator, right? So there's forward capex you're going to put out, right? And if you take that along with the marginal OpEx that like you have because you have a bad energy infrastructure and you're paying too much, and you compare that versus the PV of replacing that with borrowing at much cheaper rates because we're inducing it through IRA funds or whatever it might be, maybe the BlackRock fund that is financing the consumer on the energy efficient thing is a 50 basis point better rate, whatever that inducement is. If we can do that, right, then we can spur and bring forward a lot more capex the right way, taking into account all the issues that you have. And so then I'm thinking about the question that Paul brought up, which is sort of like this sort of barriers on the investor side. And I think where the IRA really comes in is it helps knock down those first of a kind costs down to nth of a kind costs, right? So when I look at all the projects that we are banging our head against the wall trying to figure out how to do, it is my sincere hope that after they learn how to make that widget, that the fifth widget that they make is a lot cheaper, or at least the volatility around the potential costs of making that widget is a lot tighter, such that we can induce private capital to come in because we've increased the Sharpe of that investment, because we've lowered the vol. We've sort of solved that problem. That is really how I would frame our objective around drawing in private capital. Yes, it would be great. I don't want to be flippant about this. It is imperative and important that we get the co-invests, that the equity, that our friends at Blackstone, come in and invest in the private side on the equity tranches of a lot of the transactions that we have. But the real scale will come when we're not the debt provider, but Jess is. 100%. And if we can help lower that vol around a lot of these projects that we're talking about, that's going to be, I think, the sort of real accelerator.
Well, I mean, the DOE's $490 million loan to Tesla is a but-for cause of the existence of Tesla in the last.
And we hope that the $9-ish billion loan to Ford and the $4-ish billion loan to GM catalyze the Silverado and the F-150. And I would love to tell you the stuff on page 3 and 4 of this deck, because there's some really cool things coming up. But I think that's the way I would think about it in terms of how the. And I don't want to minimize all the stuff that you said about community benefits and underinvestment in communities is absolutely right. But in terms of the question that really struck me on how do we catalyze investors, it's getting this FOAK down to nth of a kind.
Very, very interesting. I think it sounds that one of the inducements then to create this short to medium run approach, right, is to bring backward in time from the future using financing effectively as a time machine, the cost of these things, so that we can then accelerate the volume that we get, and then get to that cost perspective faster, right? To nth of a kind faster, because the time that we have is now going to rapidly start.
It's the easiest to see in residential houses, because I think we all understand it. Like every year that somebody replaces their HVAC system with an HVAC system and not a heat pump, that is a system we don't get to replace for 20 years.
Yeah. And particularly, we have a whole program in New York State on replacing for low moderate income housing systems like refrigerators, moving towards heat pumps, making sure that we install them at 2 feet above the floodplain, so that when impacts from climate change happen, we're not retrofitting for a future that's more vulnerable to a more complex future. We have about 5 minutes left on this panel. I will reserve half a minute for myself, but I'll give everybody on the panel 30 seconds just to give the kind of major call to action that you have to this community, which is investors, which is asset owners, it's governments, it's climate experts. What's the one thing you would love for folks to take away from this conversation about what is the pathway and trajectory on adaptation and climate resilience as an investment area from your perspective?
Well, I'm going to steal Jess's comment from earlier, which is I would love more interaction. Like we're at one of the unique tangent points between government and the private sector. We want to have these conversations. We want people to understand what we're doing. We want people to contact us. We want to know what those projects are, and so more interaction and sort of more engagement. That would be my biggest ask.
That's great. So collaboration, engagement. Janie?
I'm just going to echo that. When I was talking about those roundtables earlier, and I was thinking, it would have been great to have some people who like to nerd out on these issues in those conversations, right? To sort of get those conversations to a next step. And, would love to sort of explore those kinds of collaborations.
You're always welcome here at GARI.
Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, and so maybe just to sharpen that even further, I think we need to work towards a moment or moments where we can bring this understanding that we have in this room to a much broader audience. And we have a lot of the great ingredients here just on this panel. At the Bezos Earth Fund, we started talking to some of you about organizing such a moment where we can do like a hard reboot of the way that resilience investment is thought of, whether that's at a COP or some other high profile moment. So if you're interested in that, please get in touch.
A lot more on collaboration thematically. Jessica?
Well, I have to say, Chris, you did something for me that just changed the way, reframed it just in this conversation, talking about, and this is, I know, your residential mortgage mind nerding out, not just on adaptation, but on volatility. And I think one way to think about this from an investor perspective that I have certainly not talked about is we are short an option, like that society is short an option. And though that is climate impacts, and like, what does this investment do? It reduces volatility. That actually, like being short that option is now like valuable, like more, right? So like reducing vol is such a great way to think about it, Chris. So I love that. And I think it's stuff like this, like having these conversations, but to Paul's point, like we want to be part of that. So we want to create this, we're fiduciaries, right? But we would like to bring the investor both demand, but also the investor sort of perspective into this conversation, and help be part of that solution. So I would love, either bilaterally or part of this group to really follow up on some of these themes, make sure we're connected, and that we can hopefully together figure out how to make this an investable opportunity in the very short term.
I think just the translation of this kind of broad landscape into terms that investors are going to understand, or the analogies, right? I think, the volatility conversation sort of, you're facing not just kind of a first derivative problem with volatility increasing, but the rate of change, the second derivative problem, because, if you read just the IPCC 6, which I'm sure like everyone else has undoubtedly read all of on this call. But the fundamental point here is that a baseline, we're going to see 1.5 degrees of warming and probably a lot more. The rate of change, not just change itself, will continue to accelerate. And so we're not just looking at things are going to get volatile. They're going to get increasingly volatile and different over time. So preparing that, right? Thinking about that in estimates of your future value, your present valuing in an environment that's going to be increasingly complicated, and having that more medium run perspective, identifying the solutions, which I think is at least a first step to knowing by the time you get to that new landscape, what do you need to have in your toolkit, because it's going to be a different landscape than the one we're in right now. I think all those things are interesting, but then translating that into something investors can digest and understand, I think that pivot and collaboration into translation is a really important one. Here.
I love the theme of collaboration and this moment of changing the conversation and the hard pivot, right? I love all of that, and so definitely count me in for that. I think the only thing that I would add to it is humility, right? Where I think that there is a lot of people today live in conditions of adaptation, right? And they're adapting every day, right? And it's I think figuring out ways to learn from what they are doing and understand and expand is going to be so critical. And I think as we convene, I think and I have to remind myself of this because it's not easy, that you don't have the best ideas by a long stretch, right? Is something that I think will help us increase our rate of learning and deploying some of these solutions.
Well, I mean, I really like that anchor. I mean, I think Secretary General Gutierrez said, yeah, people they do adaptation right now. They call it surviving, right? And make no mistake, the climate crisis is a humanitarian tragedy, right? That is unfolding. We want to have an opportunity to frame it as a way that there is an investment opportunity, that the risk is not just risk, but opportunity as well. I think there are solutions that can and will be built. I think there's entrepreneurs and technologists and people of goodwill in the public sector, obviously here, and the private sector, and investors and members of all these communities that can actually have this opportunity. The one thing I would leave you with, I think we're slightly over time, I wanted to really just thank the experts on this panel. Collaboration is something that Gary's very focused on. We would love to have more of it with all of you. Chris, thank you. Janie, thank you for being here in person as well. And Paul, Jessica, here for adding the private sector and the pivot in the kind of philanthropy universe also to this area. Collaboration is really critical. The one thing I would add to it, in addition to the humility point that Mihir made, is action. And that means not just having the conversation about how we frame this and identifying this, but taking up the call to action that the Department of Energy and NOAA have given, and also investors have pushed with $100 billion of additional appetite, at least that BlackRock's identifying this area, and saying, let us actually move forward and invest, right? And actually prove the point that there are solutions at scale that we are going to need and have an opportunity to do by making those investments, not just collaborating and talking about them, not just thinking about them in broad senses. There's a chance to act. The government is already acting. You're seeing investors really bringing capital into the market. I think having that conversation is a step towards action. Let's start to take the action step as well at the same time. Thank you guys very much for being wonderful members of this panel. I would have loved to do our traditional, let every panelist ask another question to another panelist, but I think we're out of time here. We'll take a short break at this point as the panel wraps up before we kick off the second half of the GARI meeting with the traditional roll call here and discussion of other initiatives that are going on within the community itself. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you guys very much again. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
So that's just the remote one. You flipped it. Yeah. So, but you can just use this, and this is where you can pass it around.
Cool. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So you just leave it on there. Okay. Test.
green is on.
Let me turn on my. All right. Hello, I'm Lori Collins, and I'm going to the strategic advisor for GARI, and we are going to pick up the meeting, and we'd like to have a roll call and let folks have a chance to let us know who's here. I'll run through. We've got the list here of who's registered, so I'll run through quickly, and then we have an update from Jason Spenceley at the Global Environmental Facility, and if anybody else would like to do an update, just let me know. But let's get through the roll call so everybody has a chance to let us know that you're here. So I'm going to just go through in alphabetical order and just let us know your name and who your organization is. All right. So adaptation leader. Can folks hear me? I've got mine.
So they can hear you, but I just need to add them to be able to talk.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so Ira is here. Great, thank you, Ira. Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Not sure how to see.
I'm just going to open the room. People can just tell the people they can unmute. And talk.
Right, and so folks, you can unmute yourself. American Flood Coalition. Aon.
Hey, Lori, Angela Ducey's on from our public sector partnership.
Oh, great. Hey, Angela, thanks for being here. Autodesk. British International Investment. Block FI. Cadlis.
Hello, Craig Davis here from Cadlis. I hope you can hear me. Good to be connected today.
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks, Craig. Kaylee Strategy, Emily. City of Alexandria. Clean Tech Impact. If I go too fast and I miss somebody, just raise your hand. We'll get to catch you at the end. Climate Finance Advisors, Stacy. Okay. Climate Policy Initiative. Climate Resilience Consulting. Climate Kick. Connexus Corporation. Matt Della Hussein. Okay.
Hi, it's Murray Burt from DWS, the asset manager based in London. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Earth Analytic Group.
Yes, Stephanie Race, founder and CEO of Earth Analytics Group, is here.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Ian Gray at EHES.
This is Ian Gray at SHOSS. I'm a postdoctoral scholar in sociology.
Thank you for being here. Environmental Defense Fund. Asset Power. Farallon Strategies. GIZ. Great Circle Capital Advisors. Green Triangle. Ground Up Investing. We have 33 people on the line, so there's got to be somebody.
Sorry, this is Anita Campion from Connexus Corporation. I would stepped away.
Okay, great, thanks. If I missed you, if I've gotten to pass you, just jump in. International Finance Corporation. Investment Fund for Developing Countries. IGES. Institutional Investor Group for Climate Change. Impact Arc. InnoNeat Energy Solutions. ISF. JP Morgan.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Baruch, Climate Tech Investments at JP Morgan, based out of New York.
Thanks for being here, Daniel. Jupiter Intelligence. Kestrel ESG. KPMG. Lightsmith Group, we've got several. Several hands raised. Luxolair.
Yeah, good morning. This is Manuel Lichter from Luxolair, Mexico. We do index agro insurances.
Okay, thank you for being here. Marb. Miami-Dade County, Galen. Okay, MSCI. Nuveen. Paul Watkins Associates.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kit England. I'm a senior climate finance specialist at Paul Watkins Associates. We focus on economics and finance for climate change and do a lot of work around mobilizing regional and local public investment for adaptation in Europe. Lovely to meet you all.
Thanks for being here. PGIM.
Good morning, Luca Pasella from PGIM.
Resi Intel. RMSI.
Yes, I'm Dr. Lal. I look after the climate change physical risk assessment from global to local, and then developing the response strategies for adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you for, okay, thank you for being here. S&P Global. Sagana. Kim Yoon. I think this is Schiffer.
It's Sniffer. Hi, this is Johnny
Sniffer,
Casey from, I'm a senior climate resilience manager at Sniffer. We're a small sustainability charity in Scotland focusing on climate adaptation and resilience, looking at how we can mobilise both public and private finance for adaptation and resilience in Scotland. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. Then Brian Reed at Stanford. Synergy Technology Management. Syngenta Foundation. Tata Consultancy Services. The Lightsmith Group we've called Thrive Consulting. TIFS.
Hi, David Bennell, Senior Advisor at TIFS, a food systems investing network all over the world, and I'm lucky enough to be calling in from the coast of Maine. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. U.S. Department of State, Pallavi's in the room. Udayama, University of Oxford.
Hi, this is Nicola Ranger. I lead the adaptation program in the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Wolpert Engineering.
Morning, Lori. This is Dave Wegner in Tucson, Arizona, where we work on P3s and climate infrastructure.
Thanks for being here. World Bank. Yeah, right. Okay, sorry. And then Jason, of course, is going to be presenting in just a moment. And WRI.
Okay, well, coming in last quarter, Brandon, based in Washington, but currently in Nairobi.
Thank you, Carter.
Let anybody else who.
Okay, was there anybody I missed? All right. Oh, okay. I can see a couple of people that I called that weren't able to say hi, but just to let you know, we will be sending a summary of today's meeting and a recording out to everyone who registered. So I know sometimes folks register and they just want to get the recording afterwards. So that will be shared with everyone afterwards. So thank you all for registering and for being here. If we want to go ahead and advance the slide, what we're going to do first is have an update from Jason Spenceley at the Global Environmental Facility. If there's anyone else that wants to provide an update, we have until 10:30. So I'll let Jason go. And then if somebody else, just send me a chat. It's probably the easiest way for me to see it. All right.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Greetings, everyone. I'll just give a couple of minute update. Glad to be speaking with you. Represent the Global Environment Facility, or the GEF. As you may know, the GEF is an environmental multilateral fund that invests in multilateral and climate impacts in developing countries. We operate about $2 billion a year, all told, among the suite funds. We spoke about this morning about the need to create the transitions and to do this across sectors. This is the work of the Jeff blending to de-risk and strengthen the enabling environments needed for the transitions. The rewiring of the brains that Paul of the Bezos Earth Fund mentioned this morning, or the inducements that Chris of the Department of Energy spoke about. So a couple of updates. Just a week or so ago, a week and a half or so ago, the Jeff had its once every 2 years or twice a year, council meeting. And we, the council approved the specific operations of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. So this is in the synergy space, if you will, between environment, biodiversity, and climate adaptation and resilience and mitigation. We're pretty happy with this because the Jeff just received the mandate for this fund 6 months ago at the Biodiversity COP in very late 2022. And now 6 months later, it's open for business, essentially. The operative modalities are approved, which isn't easy to achieve in the global multilateral system. But it went historically quick, at least for the multilateral system. Open for business with the operative modalities, and a mantra or a real theme of the whole discussions among the council, which is a global council, was really on private sector engagement. How do we use these precious public multilateral funds to catalyze a transformation in our global economic system with strong engagement and investment of private sector entities? And one of the ways that the council built into the operations of this fund to do that is having a floor, a minimum amount of the funds that need to go through IFIs, international financial institutions, including MDBs, multilateral development banks, and others. And that floor is a minimum of 25%. That's actually quite modern. I don't know if revolutionary is the word, but it's forward thinking of a multilateral fund, and certainly the Jeff. So that's exciting. It creates a lot of opportunities for partners, including those on this call, to do things like to de-risk or create guarantees, to fund TA facilities, to create the pipeline of investment opportunities, the missing middle that we spoke about at the last GARI meeting, and financing the enabling environment conditions, the policies, and the rewiring of the brains. We're looking forward to the first seed capital for the fund, so that we can start approving projects in the next council meeting, which is when we approve projects. We're hoping for some announcements, including potentially at the Jeff Assembly, which takes place once every 4 years. That'll happen in the 22nd to the 25th of August in Vancouver, Canada, in the country of my passport, so that we can start approving specific projects. Things like the Craft Fund with the Lightsmith Group. We invested $1 million in that project, and I think it's now at about 200 million of capitalization. We want to see a series of these funds. So that's one announcement. The other is the Jeff has just become the financial mechanism for the Law of the Seas and the brand new biodiversity, BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions, to be operationalized, but that's a first step, that it's the official finance mechanism of it. And importantly, we approved $1.5 billion of projects between the different set of trust funds, including for climate adaptation and resilience. And we're looking forward to the next ones. On the theme of engagement that was spoken about in the last panel, look, if there are, we want to shape the pipeline early. So please reach out to us for your next brilliant catalytic ideas, so they don't just land on our desk. We want to co-create them together, always open for the next crafts, if you will, and the next ASAPs, the next insurance products, the next climate resilient bonds and debt restructuring initiatives. Please come to us. We'd like to talk them through and prime the pump in collaboration with key partners like the Bezos Earth Fund, of course. Okay, Jeff Council, end of August. Love to see a number of people there, and we are building towards the launch of our third round of the Challenge Program for Adaptation Innovation, which has really unearthed a number of innovative ideas and models.
Hello.
For example, some of the insurance products and investment funds,
Hello.
Landscape Resilience Fund, and others. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Great. That is really exciting. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left. I'm gonna, David Bennell from TIFS has asked to make an update. So David, if you can unmute yourself, can you?
Yep, great. Thank you. I'll be brief.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. So TIFS is a global network of food systems investors, and just to dispel any notions that you're going to stop listening when I say food systems, I'd argue that almost anybody on the call is invested somehow in food related work. So the problem is, of course, the good news is we have a ton of money. We've just heard about more in today's call, but what we recognize is we're not very good, are we? Jason, I appreciate your comment about shaping the pipeline, about pulling money in through and delivering it where it's needed. So the aspirations of those of us who are in the investor community are wonderful, but they don't necessarily match the needs of these wonderful companies, these potential unicorns out there. So TIFS has created something called the missing middle of food systems investing. It includes everybody from the White House to NOAA to USDA, family offices, big philanthropic organizations, and food and ag companies. And I invite anybody on this call that is responding to anything I'm saying to reach out to TIFS. We have a website, tifsinitiative.org, and you can get involved in the effort. Thanks so much, and all the best.
Okay, great. I would like to make one announcement for GARI. We do have an upcoming event on July 25th that has been organized in collaboration with Arise. Joyce Coffey from Climate Resilience Consulting was the idea behind this. So we have a number of speakers. The registration is open. We will be promoting it with the registration link after today, but the registration link is already live on the GARI website. So that is finance-enabled solutions for equitable disaster resilience. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's an upcoming event. And GARI will also be having an event as part of New York Climate Week in the second week of September. So look out for more information on that as well. Any last thoughts from the room, Jay?
Just quickly, and thank you to everybody that's stayed on for the second half of this call, and obviously to the panelists and so on. GARI is also in the process of considering convening interested stakeholders and experts for a potential discussion and relook at the adaptation solutions taxonomy, which is at climate@asap.org. Craig Davies from Codless and others have been heavily involved in the development of the taxonomy, which was released in 2020. It's been 3 years. A lot has changed since then. I know there's a number of different initiatives that have come forward since that point in time. So folks that are interested on this call in potentially participating in that stakeholder collaboration and discussion process, we'd love to hear from you at GARI itself. So, the website is garigroup.com. Just look out for that as a potential conversation that'll be happening over the next couple of months. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think we've just got a couple of minutes left. Any other updates, questions? I know we had some questions in the Q&A that we didn't have time for the panelists. So apologies for that. Any other, let's see. Let's see. Brian just posted in the chat the registration link for July 25th, but it's also on the GARI homepage. Anything else?
Craig raised his hand.
Okay, Craig, go ahead. Is that Craig Davies?
Hi, Laurie.
Please
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Yes.
Just to say, just to pick up on something that Jay just said when he was talking about the ASAP taxonomy, he mentioned that he's quite right. There absolutely have been a number of important developments since that ASAP taxonomy was released about 3 years ago. Just want to mention one of them, which is the work that we've been doing with the Climate Bonds Initiative on developing a climate resilience taxonomy for sustainable bonds, which I think very much speaks to the point that Jay was making about maybe the need to update the ASAP taxonomy given the developments over the past few years. I'm going to put that link in the chat. I think it could be of interest to the GARI members, and certainly the GARI membership are exactly the kind of people that we want to get feedback on for the climate resilience taxonomy that the CBI is working on. And if it would be of interest to this group, I'm sure in a subsequent meeting we'd be very happy. I'm sure CBI would be happy to provide more details on this work and to understand how it can be relevant and helpful to investors. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Craig. Anything else? Well, I want to thank Jason for being here today and thank all of our panelists who are not on, but thank you, Jason, for the update from the World Bank. Very exciting private sector engagement funding, and it's really a huge part, an enabler for the work that GARI is doing. So we really appreciate everyone being here. We do have a few people in the room, so we appreciate having a live audience as well as our Zoom audience. All right, well, with that, we will close out. Thank you, everyone, for being here.